This is the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast, session number 0012. Chris Sherlock on being bullied. Welcome to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast, a production of the European Association of Professional Hypnotherapists. That's eaph.ie. A very warm welcome to you. I'm your host, Aidan Noon. As a 13-year-old, Chris Sherlock recounts for us his story during the transition time from primary school to secondary school. The bullying Chris endured caused Chris to leave secondary school and into schooling outside the mainstream schooling system. Like the phoenix rising from the ashes, Chris emerges to enjoy a successful and powerful career in radio broadcasting, and more to happen in today's edition of the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast. Chris Sherlock, welcome to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Aidan.
Now, Chris, you are the presenter of CSI, which Chris Sherlock interview on Flirt FM, which is based in Galway.
That's correct, yeah.
Now, how long have you been doing that program?
As of the 25th of October, I'm 7 years working in Flirt FM. So the CSI sessions came a few years later. So I'm definitely about 5 years doing that, interviewing guests and what have you, and playing Irish music.
It's a very smart name you have, Chris CSI, Chris Sherlock interview. So who came up with that?
Oh, it took all night in. A team of chimps were paid, and we had a big an elite team, so it took a lot of thought was put into the process. But it was just basically, the team of the show was having an in-depth interview. So we were with the likes of all these programs on TV like CSI in Miami, and I'm a big kind of police drama buff. So I just thought, well, my initials are CS, so if I just put the I in, it's interview. So CSI sessions then. So that's where it was born.
Excellent. Now, Flirt FM itself is a community radio station, and there are lots of community radio stations throughout the country. And you mentioned that you've been some years involved in community radio.
Yeah, 7 years. It's hard to believe, but it's one of the best things you could possibly be involved in. The people you meet, through staff, through just people coming in. So like I did actually just recently, well, when I say recently, it was last year, there's a lad that lives here in Galway, and he puts on a Christmas display, and it's just fantastic. And he builds everything from scratch, with bulbs and everything to do with the show is coordinated in such a way. Now, if you're a big tech geek, you'd love all this kind of stuff, but he's just an amazing guy. And the fact that you can bring in someone like him and talk about his projects that he happened to do over the COVID lockdown just happened to be one of the best things. Now, I know he was doing it before the lockdown, but it was just so unreal to see how each year he adds to it and puts together these things. So to be involved in community radio, you can meet all sorts, and I just love that aspect of it all.
Yeah. And I recall reading about you, Chris, that you discovered that you're a people person.
Yeah. Now, if I went back in time and you said to my 13, 14-year-old self that you will be doing radio and talking to the public and all this, I would have probably looked at you as if you were a dragon or something, like 6 heads on you or something, because it was just unreal to think. Because I lost trust in people there to begin with when I was a young teenager, due to bullying.
We'll leave that aside for the moment, and let's maybe go back to what you mentioned a few moments ago. This guy, was he producing lights or something, or what was the guy doing on the radio?
No, what he was is he's just a general guy, and at Christmas he loves Christmas, and he basically puts up a Christmas light display, and so his house is literally from top to bottom
I see.
covered.
That's like, it's a pity it's radio, because it's like years ago, the expression, it's like dancing on the radio, you know? You
Yeah,
can't see it.
exactly. But yeah, exactly. But it's just remarkable to see what he can do, and with
Uh-uh.
technology,
Yeah, yeah.
and it was just like the good thing what I can say on radio is he basically synchronizes all these lights to songs. So if there's a couple of beats in a song, do you know, when
I
you've the
see,
so you know,
I
like
see.
Shakin' Stevens, Merry
Yeah,
Christmas, everyone.
uh-huh.
You know when you hear that kind of tambourine and you can hear the drums and that,
Mhm.
everything is synchronized exactly to that beat, and the
Okay,
lights will come on. It's just unreal. If you're ever down in Galway, Aiden, you have to look at it. I'm telling you.
indeed. And were you able to, paint that picture for the people listening? Using your verbal skills, using words that evoke images and color in people's minds.
Yeah, I'd like to think I did an okay job of it. Thankfully I had the guy with me on air, so he was giving me the bit of help because it, it it was his baby. So well, because he could talk us through and tell us the tech side as well as the
Uh-huh.
finished product side, it was
Yeah.
great. Like, but you know, I'm the only thing I got to do was give him songs to put on his playlist, and
Uh-huh.
then he has to go and synchronize the lights to the song. So I kind of gave him a bit of work at the end of it.
Excellent. Now, Chris, what gets you out of the bed in the morning, apart from the alarm clock?
I don't believe in them things. They drive me cracked because do you know something? I do get up before the alarm. I must be the only idiot that does it because I'm just so paranoid of the alarm clock going off. It's so weird. I actually function much better without one. But
Well,
to get to your question, of
mm,
course, to get me up in the morning,
mm,
just life itself is great,
mm.
to be honest, and I do a multitude of things. So the fact that I'm starting my career in broadcasting is one. I'm recently a gym goer, so I love to get up early and go to the gym
Okay.
and kind of get motoring and kind of just start my day good and right.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay, Chris. Now you mentioned that life is great. Now that's phrase is a very powerful phrase and a very powerful expression, and it's something that perhaps when you were a younger man, perhaps a 13-year-old, that you probably wouldn't have said life was great at that age. Tell us more about that.
No, it was quite harrowing for me at that age because it was just a surreal experience. Now that I look back on it, it's just like, did this actually happen? But I still, I don't suffer the consequences of it now, but there is little times where what I didn't know back then was called anxiety. Um, that played a big part in my life up until kind of recent years, but
Hmm.
where it all started was I was doing the transition from primary into secondary school,
Uh-huh.
and I only had a handful of people that would come with me from primary into secondary. So I didn't have my usual friend group, my posse, let's say.
Uh-huh.
And once all this started, I was nervous. I think every teenager has nerves when they're starting something new. So for me, it was a new building, new teachers, new subjects. And I was a shy kid as well growing up. I kept to myself in a lot of the stuff that I would do. But once I found my friends or found where I was comfortable, I would eventually kind of loosen up and kind of become more outgoing.
Uh-huh.
but but it wasn't the case back then, uh, going into secondary, because my, everything was shattered, putting it simply,
Okay.
because from the get-go when I started in the school I was subject to name calling. So that went on from the very start to the second I ended up leaving the school, and I would ignore these, you know comments that would be made to me and all this kind of thing, but it just kept getting worse. And by that I mean I was into my second week, and I was on the phone to my mother at the time, and I would update her with how the school was going, so getting used to the new subjects, etc.
Hmm.
And I would kind of do this regularly in the lunch break and just spend 5 minutes just to let her know what was going on, and it was just kind of good for me as well. at the time, because I am a mummy's boy, and I was very much back then, so
Hmm.
it was all that coming into play. But as the second week went on, it was no different from any other day. I was on the phone, and then suddenly up behind me, I was pushed against a wall by two lads,
Hmm.
and one of these lads took my phone out of my hand. They flung it across the area where I was, and they just started saying, "Oh, who are you on the phone to? You shouldn't be on the phone." And then all of a sudden, there was a hand around my throat during this,
Hmm.
and I just thought, like, what's going on? I was in complete fear. I was in complete shock of what was happening, and I just tried to squirm out of it as best as I could. But they were calling the names, the usual, and what felt like an hour was only literally probably a minute or two.
Yeah.
But it just was so, in that moment, all I could remember was get away, get away, get away. And then I was conscious of my mum on the phone in case the call was still active, because I didn't want her to know. I didn't want
Uh-huh.
anyone to know what was going on. I never reported the name calling to begin with. And even when I got out of this incident, I went to the nearest corner that was quiet, and I just phoned my mother back, and I covered it up saying that I just dropped my phone and the battery came out. And she was kind of none of the wiser at the time.
Yes.
She didn't get kind of pick up on anything and was wrong, thankfully.
Hmm. Now, Chris, what you're telling us here now is a story of bullying, and it could be any person's story, but of course it is your story, but it is reflective of what is actually possible out there in the world in terms of a young person, young boy, young girl going to school. And I know that nowadays we're talking a lot about bullying and about anti-bullying and about people's rights to live their life without any interference. Now, your story actually um, is part of the mental health for millennials, and you write in volume 4 about that. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Aidan. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this came fairly out of the blue, to tell you the truth. I never spoke about the incidences like the first one there I just told you,
Uh-huh.
for the simple reason that I had basically locked it up and didn't want to talk about it ever again. Um, and I just was basically working in radio, and I was doing a mental health special, and I've been promoting the books on air since the very first volume.
Mm.
And I believe the first volume, I think, started in 2017, and it was just it was a fascinating book to me at the time when I first read it. And I just thought, well, I'd talked to one or two of the authors that was involved in it, because it's always had a multitude of authors over the volumes. So I would have them in, and we would talk about their chapter and talk about their involvement in it. So when volume 3 was released, it was like no other release. We would bring someone on. So I decided to do a full hour special on mental health, and it was near World Mental Health Day back in 2019. So I had one of the Book Hub MDs involved in one of the interviews that I was doing for this mental health special, and he just basically we were talking about the book and what was in it, and there was a chapter on anxiety and stuff like that. So I was talking about that, and I kind of mentioned that I had my own experience with anxiety due to bullying. So
Mhm.
we then kind of talked about social media, and that kind of brought up bullying in current years. So I kind of gave a little bit of the gist of being bullied. I didn't give too much away, to be honest, but it was after this show, the Book Hub MD Niall McElwee and Susan McKenna, they rang me up and they said, can we talk to you further about your story? And we just want to get a better angle of what you've experienced, if you're open to talk about it. So we met for a coffee, just chilled out, nothing major. So I recalled what I could, and we met and we chatted, and I told him the gist of kind of what had happened. And he said that he finds it interesting, and he said he was happy that I was past it and so forth. But he asked me, would I be comfortable writing the chapter for the book and telling my story as open and as honest as I could possibly go. And I said to my first words was, "You want me to be an author in your book series? I can just about write a letter. Never mind write a chapter in a book."
Uh-huh.
So I was there kind of like stunned, and I now it was a great opportunity to be asked. I'm not going to lie, I was so stunned at it. I just didn't realize that, what was happening really.
Uh-huh.
But the book hub group are so good, and they said, look, we'll work with you through it, and we'll help you in any way possible. We have a team of editors, and we can help you ourselves, so it won't be a problem. So I thought, great. But then I was kind of thinking afterwards, if I go back and remember all what was happening to me, and if I had to write it down and kind of retrace my steps, and because you have to get some, even though your story is your story, like you said, but I wanted to go and get the facts right. I wanted to kind of, there was parts of it that were blurry, where what
Mm.
happened then, what happened next. What was this section, the part where I talk about like going to a psychologist and all this kind of stuff. So I wanted to know what this was on, how long did that last for. So I was trying to do my own research on my own
Yeah.
life, for the finer details, let's say.
Hmm.
Because again, I was only a young teen, so I didn't really have any conception of time or anything like that. So I managed to get it all together, and I kind of thought, oh, this is going to be bad. So I actually declined it at first, and I said to him that I wasn't going to be able. So he said, okay, no problem. But he came back to me. This was before Christmas 2019. And he came back to me just in the new year, and he says, look, he says, there's no pressure. I just want to put the question to you again. Would you be up for being involved in the book? And he says, you can take your time. He says, if you don't get it in, you don't get it in. But I just want you to have that extra chance to be in it. He says, we like working with you in promoting the book. We want to work with you as one of our authors in the book. So I just said, yeah. I said, you know what? Let's definitely do it. And that's where it all came from. So the
Hmm.
story is in there for all to read. It's as open, as honest as it possibly can for one particular chapter.
Hmm.
But
Okay. Now, as a young man, Chris, of 13, being bullied, being, in other words, actually having had to leave school because of the bullying, uh, where did you get within you that power, that, what would I call it, determination, that confidence? How did you rebuild yourself up? What did it take to get you to where you are today?
it took a lot of effort, in the sense that I had to basically educate myself, to begin with, because when I had left school, I was talking to a teen psychologist. I was regularly checked by my GP. I was left to my own devices once my home tuition had stopped, because I did get it for a short period of time. So I would kind of engage in different things where I could possibly do at home, and kind of go online. And I kind of got so far with what I was given by my tutor, and I would kind of work off with, say, avenues of education where we left off. I would kind of do what I could, and just improv. And I was kind of always told, once you know your times tables, you'll be doing really well in life.
Mhm.
I'm not a numbers person, so I knew I wasn't never going to be an accountant or anything like that. But it just left me in a little bit of a period of purgatory, if you get me. And
Uh-huh.
it just seemed like everything was happening, but I wasn't doing anything. So it and because of all what had happened with me with the bullying, I had lost trust in people. So
Yeah.
it was very hard for me to try and go back into, say, groups. So like going back to school was a definite no, because of what had happened, and I was very fearful for what was to come again, should I start a new school and have new bullies. That was always a factor I could never get past. And the anxiety of that and the stress that it caused was unreal, because I had the Minister for Education in Galway at the time even coming to my house saying, look, you need to go back to school, you need to get an education. I
Uh-huh.
knew all of this, of course, Aidan, but
Yes.
it wasn't necessarily a thing where I wasn't doing it because I wanted to be playing video games at home. It was because I couldn't, and I would try different scenarios. So I was given different services, so I could go into another smaller group, which is a bit like school, and you learn a bit more. I did try that, I lasted not even a day because I was looking at all the exits when I went in. I
Yeah.
was watching the teachers. I was afraid that
Hmm.
if anyone called me as much as a name or an
Yeah.
idiot or something so small and so
Mm.
easygoing, that I knew that was going to be the start of being bullied again. So
Yeah.
I just couldn't. So I lost complete trust for a long time.
Hmm.
And when I eventually gained my trust, it was through just slowly come to terms with things myself. I would go into town with my parents and I'd get used to being around groups of people again. I wouldn't do it daily, but there was a time where it did become daily, in periods after this. But at first I was just taking my stride. I'd be with people I was comfortable with, and that kind of slowly kind of got me back into the public, surroundings of going into, say, Dunn's and getting a comic or something. Even that was a chore at first, but I managed to get by it little by little.
Hmm.
And nowadays I am in the public eye. You're subject to all sorts of criticism, but it wasn't an easy road. There was a lot. There was therapy in the background, such as counseling and talking to people, and
Yeah.
that helped hugely as well. And when I was checking out my GP, I was always given advice to focus on your hobbies. Don't let anything get you down. There's nothing worse than someone telling you you're not good enough when you are good enough. So focus on your strengths, what you love to do, and you will never be stuck. So I
Yeah.
kind of stuck with that and got through the days, little by little.
Yeah.
And when I turned 16, then I was given more opportunities because I was still young, and I got to talk to a youth advocacy service here in Galway called Galway City Partnership. And there was a man that works there called John, and John would come out to me weekly, sometimes twice a week, and we would do little projects together. So he would focus on what I like to do or whatever. So even though I do have a sibling, I do have an older brother, but he was acting as another older brother and kind of would be coming in from the outside and kind of get me to focus on what I like to do. He would prepare me for a CV if I wanted to go to for a course or for a job. Uh, so he was with me for a few years. I think he was with me for 5 years, and we just kind of worked on different things. So because of my hobbies included the likes of photography and music, I would do photography for a local community center, and that was sketchy at first, but I eventually got through it and took up the mantle of being a photographer for certain events through the community centers for 2 or 3 years.
Hmm. Excellent. Now, you mentioned earlier, and that during the throes of all the bullying, that you were thrown physically thrown down the stairs, but you write that the mental torture is much worse than the physical torture, physical abuse.
Yeah, you see, at the time, I was thrown down a flight of stairs. It was
Hmm.
hardcore flooring. I done some. They done some damage to me. It was in the moment. Those wounds existed, but they also healed up within a few
Yeah.
days. Now I was lucky. The school nurse that I went to shortly after that, even though I had a big gash on my wrist to my elbow that was pumping with blood, she said you were lucky, and I've always thought of that since. When I associate telling the story, that
Uh-huh.
I was really lucky because I didn't break my neck. I didn't damage anything. I didn't damage my back, so I'm fit and healthy today, thankfully, just about.
Yeah.
um, but to be honest with you, looking back on it, those wounds and the bruises, they all healed up within a week or so.
Uh-huh.
But I was still living with the PTSD of the events that were happening in the school. So
Yeah.
I would look back and relive that day for weeks after. It was probably even months, because all I could do was relive looking up at these bullies that just pushed me down the stairs, and they were laughing and skitting. and this was affecting me when I was sleeping. I would wake up in sweats, but in case it would happen again, and it would be worse. At the time, I didn't think I could possibly get worse, but I could have been much worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think this played on my life for years after, and it was just so unreal. It caused me the anxiety where I couldn't be around making new friends, which is what I wanted to do. It affected me starting a job. It affected me in terms of my personality for a while, where it was just I was afraid to be me because I was afraid to even go out and be that outgoing guy I was born to be. And it was like if that few years of my life was just zapped away, and
Mm-hmm.
it was because of that, and the anxiety and just everything to go with that was just it played havoc.
Yeah.
And that was the worst thing, trying to wake up in the morning and deal with the pressure of like not being able to do anything because you're in fear all the time.
And that's when you write about, the sense of being disconnected. But through your efforts, as we've heard you earlier, you've reconnected with people, and you're now active and participant in your life in Galway.
Yeah.
Now, you are a radio person and you love communicating. And where do you see the future for yourself?
Well, I hope to be on a national radio station, Aidan, where you'll be sick of listening to my voice, hopefully at some stage. And I hope to be on your TV screens as well.
Oh, excellent. Right.
Broadcasting, I believe, is in my blood. There's no greater job than it.
Mm,
I'm lucky enough to be going along this lines, and
mm,
I hope to be working with people that gets me further in broadcasting with through TV, and hopefully front a show that is successful. And I have all these plans in my mind, and I
yeah.
hope they come to fruition at some point soon.
Hmm.
But that's what I'd love to do.
Mm,
It's just in me.
good.
I've just loved it. The radio and TV was always on in our house when I was growing up, and I just remember looking at the greats on TV, the likes of the late Gabriel Byrne, and
Mm,
you just look at these guys that would be doing, like, he was responsible for the start of the Late Late Show here in Ireland,
yes, of course.
and he was just a natural on TV. He made things that look really, really hard look really, really easy. And I thought, well, I'd love to be able to do that. And I believe I can, because the stories that you hear from people and the people you meet, like community radio, like I said earlier, it's
Mm,
just an amazing thing. And I know you know this, Aidan, as well. I know you've worked in community radio as well and all that. So it's it's just that's what I love to do. I love meeting new people, and if I get to do that within my job, then there's no greater thing, to be honest with you.
mhm. And who is your hero in broadcasting? Who would you look up to?
There's quite a few, but there's just one, and there's just one main guy I always find myself watching on TV and just
Uh-huh.
looking at, and that's Paul O'Grady. He's
Okay.
a British Irish TV personality, and I just watch his stuff. But there's back home here in Ireland, there is Gay Byrne, like I said.
Yeah.
But even on radio, there's loads of other broadcasters around, and their way of interviewing and chatting, you know, I I have my own way of doing it, of course, but it's just I just always listen and look at these guys, and I just think, wow, this is definitely the job. And the
Mhm.
more and more I see them do it, and the more I continue doing my work, then I just know that it's destined to be.
Wonderful. Now, Chris, if there was any piece of advice that you could give to a young person out there, or indeed any person out there who finds themselves being bullied or being harassed in any way, what would you say to them?
Well, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't do, and that was speak up from the get go. And it was kind of a thing that I do regret looking back. I don't regret nothing else after the decision to stay out of school, and that I think that was the best thing, because it was the thing that I had to do to live. Because I did contemplate suicide with all that, so
Hmm.
it was a tough time, and I bottled everything up, and that's where it led to. And I thought, well, if I talked up earlier, I wouldn't have been as stressed out or as anxious as I would have been. So it's very hard to say to someone, look, speak up quick and it'll be okay, because you're thinking of the consequences that it may have. I didn't want to disappoint my parents at the time. I didn't want to be a burden to them. I didn't want them to think that I was weak. I just didn't want them to be disappointed, in the nutshell. And I was always in fear of that. And I was trying to be a young teen that was impressionable as well. And it's like anyone that starts a new job, you want to impress your coworkers. It's the same thing. You're doing it in every kind of walk of life, really. Whether you're in a bar chatting, you're trying to find that connection with somebody to have the chat and enjoy your drink or enjoy your meal, whatever the case may be. And I was trying to do that, but I didn't get to where I wanted to be with that, and I was kind of mad at myself. So with all that going on, I just kind of recoiled back into myself, and it was the worst thing. So, like, to anyone that's going through bullying or going through any form of anxiety or depression, the quicker you get help, the light will be at the end of the tunnel for you.
Hmm.
There's so much services out there. If you don't trust talking to your parents or your siblings or to even a friend, or maybe there's that work colleague that you just get on with better than family, talk to someone. Just say, look, I'm feeling down and out, or I'm feeling not good at work because there's someone picking on me, or I just feel that this guy has it out for me, or this girl has it out for me. Talk up, share the story, and you will find help, as you go by, and you can go through the proper channels. Definitely report it, because that is, it if it gets physical abuse, it's mental abuse, and that's worse than anything out there.
Hmm.
So just find it in your stride to speak up. The quicker you do so, the better that it is for yourself. May not seem easy, but trust me, you get the courage, do it in your own time as well. There's this stigma of, oh, you have to get everything done in a certain time frame. That's a load of rubbish. You do it on your time frame, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
Explore the channels, talk to a counselor, talk to family, as I said, and there will be light at the end of the tunnel. It's just about acting on it and getting through it the best you can.
Great. Now, the book that we mentioned earlier was Mental Health for Millennials, and you have written on volume four. How can anyone get a copy of these publications?
So they're available in a few bookstores now at the minute. So they're in Hannah's in Dublin, um, O'Mahony's in Limerick, Charlie Burns here in Galway. But if you like to be lazy, you can go online and you can order on bookhubpublishing.com, and it'll be delivered right to your door.
Oh, excellent. Now, Chris, is there any just final point that you want to make before we end the podcast?
Um, the only point I'd like to make is, to anyone that's maybe listening and that's struggling with anything in life, or if they're just in a bit of a rut, just kind of always weigh up the pros than the cons, because sometimes the cons can be greater than normal. And trust me, there's more pros than there'll ever be cons. It's just you have to literally sit down and write them down and focus on the good pro that you think is your best of what's on that list, and just focus on that. Focus on whether that pro is a hobby you love doing. So if you love paint, or if you're a musician, you love playing the guitar. We're given life, and the life is a great thing, and the people around there are fantastic, despite the few people you might meet in life that are quite a pain in the backside, let's put
Mhm.
it mildly. But
Yeah.
you'll always overcome that. There's no road too bleak. There's always another turn off point, and you can just, sometimes you might need to go the long way, sometimes you can go the short way. But just don't let anyone walk on you. You do you, and I guarantee you, your life will be absolutely amazing. Whether you want to start a family, start a career, whatever the case, it'll eventually come to you. So no matter how bleak life may seem, just always remember that there's always the hill that you go over, and there is that light on the other side.
Well, that's very positive advice, positive, affirmative advice from you, Chris. Now, you present tell us about the name of the program that you present again on Flirt FM.
Yeah, so it's Chris Sherlock on the Wireless is the show, and then within the show, it's kind of got many names over the years, Aidan. To be honest with you, so it started off as the midweek show, then it went to the Chris Sherlock show, and now it's Chris Sherlock on the Wireless. But it's basically got my name in it, so it's the Chris Sherlock show as such, and
Okay.
that's where the CSI sessions are born,
Okay.
in terms of chatting to people from all walks of life, whether you're an actor, actress, comedian, author. You know, if I can get you on the show, you're more than welcome on. Um, and due to recent life events, thanks to COVID, it's just mainly a music show at the minute. But I play a selection of all Irish artists on the show, and it's just an amazing platform to highlight Irish talent at the minute, because we have such great singers and musicians in this country, and sometimes they get overlooked. They don't get the airplay they deserve. So within my show, that's the goal that I like to do, and get as many as I can on the show each week, and just play it for people to hear, because they mightn't be signed. You know, some of these artists that send in music, they're unsigned and they're looking to get signed, or they're looking to get gigs. So like someone with a great voice that's just been overlooked, at least if they're heard on radio. I went to a concert recently, actually, Aidan, and it was I feel like name dropping here, but it was Sir Cliff Richard, the concert I went to, and he gave a great stat. And this is very apt for what I'm about to say, because he is 81 years old and he's had a big career, as many would know.
Yeah.
And he's had, over the 80 years, or over the 60 years in the business that he's singing and performing, because he did start very young, but he's in 8 decades, he's had top 5 albums, and that is a massive achievement. And even when he's on stage performing, he still talks about the music. He doesn't talk about the lights, the glamour, the money. He just talks about the music, and the music is the fantastic part of it, where he talks about guitars and what have you. And that is the dream for many people out there. But it's those stats that are absolutely amazing to make your mark.
Yeah.
And I just love that kind of thing. And it's a great achievement. So there is all that out there. And once you're all about the music, it'll all come to you, you know. So, you know, the reason why I use Cliff there as an example is he started from the very beginning. You know, he was sending out tapes and so forth, as they all do. Now, the chart game in this day and age is much different, and, you know, to get radio play is much different, but he had the support from radio stations, and that's where the likes of I come in. You know, we pick the records, we put it on the show, and our listeners get to hear these artists and support them along the way, and hope that when they have shows locally or nationally, that people will go and see them. And it's just an amazing way. And that's also why I kind of got into radio, because you're helping give someone else's talent a plug, and all being well, they go on to do amazing things.
Excellent. Now, the Flirt FM, they broadcast in Galway on FM. What's the frequency in Galway on FM?
So it's 101.3.
101.3. And of course, they're broadcast on the internet as well.
They are, yeah. You can listen live on flirtfm.ie, and you can catch us on your TuneIn app if you listen on your phone. And it's on the Amazon Alexa as well, if you just look for Simple Radio and play Flirt FM. Along with the socials, you can also check out the show on mixcloud.com. So if anyone wants to listen back to my show, all the latest shows that have aired are gone up there, so you can listen back to the full music shows. And you can also listen back to all the interviews that I've done over the years with my guests. They're available as a podcast on Mixcloud, Spotify, iTunes, by simply searching Chris Sherlock on the Wireless.
Great. Now, I'm not sure whether you want people to contact you, but if you do, maybe give your contact details. If you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, if people want to get in touch, you can find me on social media. Is probably your best bet, to be honest. So on Twitter, it's Chris_Sherlock. On Instagram, it's Chris Sherlock 2012. And on Facebook, it's Chris Sherlock on the Wireless.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. That was Chris Sherlock. And thank you so much for being with me today, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Aidan. My pleasure.
You have been listening to the Professional Hypnotherapist podcast. Please stop everything and start exploring to find solutions for you at eaph.ie. You know you want to make positive beneficial change in your life, and yet you may not have the know-how. Discover how you too now can find solutions for you at eaph.ie.